Welcome to Voices and Visionaries, the podcast featuring the female forces in sports media. I'm Kelly Burke, and joining me today is Meghan McPeak, play-by-play broadcaster for the Capital City Go-Go, the G League affiliate of the Washington Wizards, and now in her second season as voice of the WNBA's Washington Mystics. Meghan, I'm so thrilled we could connect today. How are you?
Kelly, thanks for having me on. I'm doing really, really well. Just hanging in there like everybody else. But I appreciate you having me on. How are you doing?
I'm good. Kind of the same. Just trying to see the silver lining and everything, and just hoping at some point we get back to some level of normalcy. But as I told you a couple of minutes ago, I'm just thrilled that some of my colleagues in the industry are able to work some level of games right now, and obviously a lot more important things going on in our country right now with race and social justice. And so there's just a lot of work to do even outside of broadcasting.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you 100%. There's a few pandemics going on, which is crazy to think that that's happening all at once.
When you got into broadcasting, I'm not sure that you necessarily foresaw all the barriers you were going to be breaking as the first female play-by-play of the National Basketball League in Canada, and then more recently as the first and the only female play-by-play of a G League team. How is being a leader in our industry reflected in your day-to-day approach to calling games?
I think the easiest thing for me is that I just call the games. Like it sounds so simple, but I don't even think about that. I try not to, and because it's been now 5 seasons within the G League, I am able to compartmentalize, the historic side of things and the barrier-breaking side of things versus, calling games. And I don't think about it. I don't think about it going into games. I just focus on, the task at hand and try to call up the best game that I can each and every single time we have one. So I don't think about it at all, really. It doesn't make who I am as a broadcaster, and it doesn't make who I am as a person. So while it's great and everything, my biggest hope is, when I leave the game, whether it's, 10 years, 15, 20 years, 30 years from now, the biggest impact I want to have is on the next generation of young men and women, and especially young women of color and minorities, because if they can, see me on camera and realize that they can do anything, even if it has nothing to do with sports media, then I feel like I've done something, and I feel like I've done my job as someone who is breaking barriers, because the biggest thing is I don't want the next generation to have the same obstacles and struggles that my generation and the generations before me have had.
The goal is obviously that at some point in our lifetime that this isn't even a thing, that we're not even having to talk about stuff like this because it's so normalized.
Right. And I would agree with you. And that's probably my biggest, I'll say, issue with, always being asked that question, and I understand because I'm in media that it needs to be asked. And if I've never spoke to someone about it and had that conversation, I realize that that's going to be, one of the first few questions that I am asked. So I understand it, but at the same time, I would prefer the conversation to just be about the ability to do my job and not the fact that I, am a female. So if at some point in my career, I can just be looked at as a play-by-play broadcaster and that's it, I will be happy. But I understand, the magnitude and what comes with breaking barriers and, taking the next leg of trailblazing for women in sports.
We often see former college basketball players in the analyst chair of a broadcast booth. You were a former standout point guard at Humber College. How has that helped you, being a former point guard, now that you're in the play-by-play role?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the way I call games, I call it from the standpoint of a point guard and the way I see the game playing out. So while I say that, at the same time, I'm still calling the game as everyone else is seeing it. But I have the ability, because I played, to see things before they happen. And that comes with, playing the game and being a point guard and having that, viewpoint and mindset that, I know this set and I know all 5 or 6 options off of it. So when I'm, surveying the floor, what options can I get the quickest, the easiest, and the most efficient? And because of that, as a player, I can now, take that into the way I call games. And I feel like that sets me apart from most play-by-play people. And it gives me a different, background of calling a game. And it gives people a different viewpoint in how, they're watching the game with me, dictating it to them. So I just feel like it gives me a different view and allows me to see the game the way I did when I played.
What is it about the play-by-play role in particular that resonated with you so much? When I know in college you were doing some analyst work on the radio for the men's team at your college, but then when you had sort of that chance opportunity to dabble in play-by-play.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate situation that happened that allowed me to move, 3 feet over, but I'm forever grateful for the opportunity and for them asking me. But it's just fun. Like, I enjoy telling the story. I enjoy telling people's story. And I think because, when I played and when you're the point guard, you're dictating what the defense is kind of doing, even though, the defense is trying to dictate what you're going to do offensively. And I think because of that, and because I have that background, I enjoy and love calling the game from that point guard perspective and from that, quarterback on the floor perspective for the coach. And I think I look at calling games the same way, whereas, the coach on the floor is now my producer and my director. And I now have to take what they want from a rundown standpoint of what we're going to do in the game. I have to take that and execute it in the way I call the game. And I think it allows me to still stay connected to the game in a weird way. But yeah, it's fun being able to dictate and tell the story and kind of drive the ship of the broadcast for those that may be watching. And, I came from a radio background, and with radio, as you know, you have to dictate everything that's happening. So now in television, you don't have to do as much, but I also try to keep in the back of my mind that not every viewer has the ability to see what's visually happening on the screen. So I try to keep in mind those that may be visually impaired or, might have a visual impairment and not completely blind, but they can't see the game the same way. So when I call games, I will still have a bit of a radio call in my description of certain things throughout the game than most television play-by-play broadcasters would do, just because I have that background of 4 seasons doing radio.
Because you have that radio background, how much easier did it make the transition to the TV side? Because radio, I mean, it's an art. There's not a teleprompter. It's all ad-libbed. So it's a very hard skill. I think people have sometimes trouble grasping how challenging it actually is.
I look back at all my radio experience, those 4 seasons calling games and then hosting 2 shows, one of which being, a 2-hour weekly hoops show and another one being pregame and postgame. And, like you said, Kelly, with radio, you don't have any visual help. You are on an island by yourself and you have to adapt on the fly. And I look at that experience as, thankful and grateful because it made the transition into television so much easier. I read off a teleprompter for the first time, I think in like 2016 or 17. And that felt abnormal, but after I ran through it a couple times, it was super easy. It was second nature almost. And I think because in radio, you have a 2-hour show, or, you look at a pregame and a halftime, you might only need 30 minutes on air, but you prep as if it's a 2 or 3 hour show, because there's so many things that can go wrong or go against what your game plan initially is. And that, it stems in my playing experience. You can game plan and have a scouting report and watch all this film on the team, and they throw another wrinkle at you. You need to be able to adapt and recognize something on the fly. And you look at the NBA playoffs right now, for example, I think it was game 1 or game 2, the Rockets looked like they were in a zone. And Mike D'Antoni came out and said, no, it wasn't a zone. We just set up our man-to-man to mimic and look like a zone to throw off the defense, or to throw off the offense, so that they didn't know what set to throw at them on the defensive end. And I think radio and television in that transition is similar, because I know, friends that have gone from TV to radio, and they find that transition very easy, or very hard, whereas radio to TV is much easier, because you've had to learn how to fill a spot where you were supposed to have a call-in guest, and your producer can't get them on the phone, or their signal is bad, so they're saying, give me 15 minutes and I'll be at home, and I could get on a landline. Now I have to fill an entire segment that wasn't supposed to happen because I'm supposed to have a guest. So once you can figure that out and get comfortable doing that, TV is a breeze compared to radio. And I always tell, the younger group, especially the ones that are in college, if you can get experience, at least 2 years of experience working in radio, either as a producer or as an on-air talent, working in television will come so much easier, because you have those visual cues and visual aids that you don't have in radio.
Absolutely. I'm curious to know your experience with young broadcasters. When I talk to young broadcasters, or when they approach me, I get a lot of young women saying that they want to be sideline reporters, which is great. I get some occasionally that talk to me about wanting to be an analyst, and then even fewer about wanting to do play-by-play. And I always am encouraging them, because I do all 3 roles in what I do depending on the sport. I'm always encouraging them to pursue the play-by-play or analyst. Why do you think play-by-play in particular is so intimidating for young female broadcasters?
It more so stems from the fact it is still an old boys club. And you don't see many, if at all, any women in the play-by-play role in men's sports. And the select few of us that are in that role, you don't see us as often as you see the men. And I think young female broadcasters get intimidated by that, because they think it hasn't been done, or it can't be done. And like you, Kelly, I try to encourage them to, go after an analyst opportunity. If someone asks you to do it, like, take that challenge. Same with play-by-play. But that's not to, denigrate or disrespect the sideline role, because it is a huge, important, and very integral role to the broadcast. And I think society has made it normal to see women on the sideline, and that's what society accepts. And, when we first started this call and talking about the fact there's multiple pandemics happening, that's one of them, is changing the way society looks at things and changing what society accepts as normal. And I think the more female broadcasters see themselves in other roles, not just what society expects and accepts, I think we will see more women as analysts. We will see more women in the play-by-play role. And that's something that is slowly but surely changing now. And I hope it continues to change, because there's no reason that you can't have a female in the broadcast booth and off the sideline.
It's so well said. I hope we see that too. The WNBA is right now in the Wubble in Bradenton, Florida. You and your broadcast partner, Christy Winter-Scott, are back calling their games in the DC area. What's been the biggest adjustment for you to remote broadcasts?
So the cool thing about this is the fact that my first season here in DC with the Go-Go, we actually did the road games remotely.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, we tested, we tried it out to see how it was, and to see what things were like. And it's basically like I got back on a bike and re-taught myself how to ride it. So I'm thankful that I had that experience of, doing a remote broadcast and understanding the intricacies of it. I think even back to that first season, the biggest, learning curve is not being able to interact with the officials when certain things are called, when there's a call on the floor that isn't something that's called often, not necessarily that isn't called, but isn't called often. So for example, like an away from the play foul, that's not an often occurrence. It's very, very few of them in a game. I can say on, in my 2 seasons now with both G League and W in DC, I can say probably, on 2 hands count the amount of away from the play calls. So while they don't happen often, when they do happen, you want to make sure that the information you're giving the viewers is correct. But at the same time, given the situation and what we're having to do with, the WNBA broadcast, we're seeing it as well too in the NBA, is remind people, this is a very unprecedented time. They're in one location, we're in another location, and we try to work it out that way. And I always make sure that I have the game stats, but the play-by-play as well available to me, that they're inputting in the system down in Bradenton, so that if there is something I'm unsure about, who the technical foul was on, or who, defensive 3 seconds, things like that, I'll pull that up really quickly, refresh it a couple times, make sure it's up to date, and then I'll just read it off of there. And we had a situation where there's a technical foul actually called. It was in I think it was our Sunday game. And I knew a technical was called, didn't know exactly who was on. I waited for a couple seconds. Christy and I were talking, refreshed it, and found out who it was on. So that allowed me to then inform those who were watching that might not have seen it as well too, because it either happened going to break or coming back from break, and it was really quick. So things like that are probably the biggest adjustment, is just not having the availability of the officials being right there where they can slide over like you see on television and inform the broadcasters of what the call is. And I think the NBA has done a very good job of miking them. We see it, watching the playoff games where they come over to the scores table and you have the sound of them telling the scores table and the broadcasters exactly what it is. So that would be one wrinkle where I'd like to have that voice from down in Bradenton as well too. I know they're able to communicate with the scores table there, but to have that sound come through would be great.
What about the prep? I mean, I'd imagine specifically for the Mystics, in a normal situation, assuming it's a home game, you're going to shoot around, you're talking to some of the coaches and players at shoot around or at some point that day, game day. How has that prep obviously changed because you can't be there in person?
That's been super interesting. Everything is now basically just Zoom. So it's still the same. We still hop on, post shoot around Zoom calls. Typically with that, what has changed is the fact that on a game day, shoot around, you'll get one player and then you won't get coach until pregame. So they have the pregame availability, which is the same in, what we knew as the former normal with live sports. So we have to do it that way. Practice days, it's similar. We just get players and coach after practice. But I know if I have any questions, I can email or text our PR person, Ketsia Coleman, and shoot some questions her way, and she'll try and get me the info or the insight back. That's been a different adjustment because I know last season, Christy and I were at every practice, sitting in on practices, sitting in on training camp. So we had that luxury of getting the full practice versus, just going in for that final half hour when media is available. So that was great access that Mike Thibault gave us for the broadcast. And that's the great thing about Coach T, is that he understands that, because we are the team broadcast, we need a different level of insight and viewpoints than, a national broadcast would. But that's probably been the biggest adjustment, is just, trying to adapt. But luckily with technology, it's made it easier than expected and easier than it could be if we were, didn't have Zoom, didn't have technology or video chatting. It would all be, conference calls, which isn't the funnest.
Last year, you were part of a WNBA Championship in your first season of doing play-by-play for the Mystics. When you were the voice of the Raptors 905 in Canada, you also were able to experience a championship there. What unique perspective has being a part of championship seasons and runs given you as a broadcaster?
I wouldn't say it's changed my perspective or given me anything, unique, because just like the NBA does it, after the first couple rounds, ESPN takes over the playoffs. And because last year the Mystics had that, 1 seed, they had a double bye in the first 2 rounds. So we actually didn't broadcast any of the playoffs because they didn't start until the semifinals. So it was the ability to just sit back and watch and enjoy, the basketball that was being played while I was still, anxiety ridden, because I want them to win. And, things got close with Las Vegas. It definitely was close with Connecticut in the finals, but, it has given me the perspective of just enjoying every game. And it hasn't really changed the way I call games. It hasn't, I haven't had to adapt to, calling games because of that experience. The only thing it has changed is the fact that when I do a game, I focus on that game. I don't look ahead. I don't look at the game I just did. And just focus on the enjoyment of that one and try to make that game, my next best call. And then I try to do the same thing the following game after that. So probably just enjoying the experience, enjoying the moment, and living in that moment of the game that's happening. Because, you look at what's happening in the world right now, and especially in the US, and to put it frankly and candid, there's no guarantee on the next day. And I know, pre-pandemics, there was no guarantee on the next day either. But I think with everything that we are seeing at the forefront in today's society, that's, even amplified more in the fact that there's no guarantee that you will come home at the end of the day. So why not enjoy everything you're doing in those moments? So I've tried to remember that every single game.
That's refreshing. And I notice, obviously, you have the t-shirt on, Say Her Name. And one of the things I appreciate and admire most about you is your activism. Every day on Twitter, you demand justice for Breonna Taylor, and you continue to bring light to these issues and keep them in the forefront. When did you realize the power of your own voice, regardless of the feedback or any negativity that you get on social media for being active about your beliefs?
First, I want to say thanks to Instagram and Twitter for implementing the feature of turning notifications and turning comments off. I have utilized that in the last week like no other, because I was consistently just, either deleting or blocking or muting people, which I still do. I have no shame. I'm quick with the mute and block button. So beware, if you come at me incorrectly, I will not even hesitate. on social media, because at the same time, while I realize we need social media for our voices and our platforms and also what we do in the sports industry, I also hate it for the negativity that we consistently see on a daily basis. So if that means I'm quick with the mute and block button and, turning off comments, that saves a bit of my sanity, and I'm fine with that. But to your question, Kelly, I'm a very introverted person. I'm very extroverted with my friends and family. But when it comes to, working in a public forum and in the public eye, I am cautious of what I share of my life, because I would still like some of my life to be private, while at the same time I realize not everyone has that luxury. And it was watching a woman and a player like Natasha Cloud and Renee Montgomery utilize their voices and their platforms for the better. And because of them, and I've only gotten to know Renee Montgomery a little bit in recent weeks and months, but Natasha I have known since I got to DC, and the friendship I've been able to build with her is something I will forever be grateful for, because she has encouraged me and given me the empowerment to use my voice and not worry about what people may say, because like her, that could have easily been me. And that's still reality. Mm-hmm. That is still very much a reality for myself. It is very much a reality for every other Black man and woman in this country. And contrary to what people may want to believe, that is also a possibility in Canada. And the fact that I have to contemplate leaving my house on a daily basis and make sure that I take all safety measures to ensure I come home at the end of the day, that should not be my reality. That should not be any other Black male or woman, male or female's reality in 2020. And at the end of the day, as easily as Breonna Taylor could have been me, could have been Natasha, could have been any other Black woman or man in this country, she still deserves justice. Her family deserves justice. And the hundreds of other Black men and women who have been murdered for being unarmed deserve justice. It has been 165 days and counting since she was murdered on March 13th. And Daniel J. Cameron, who is the Attorney General, has done nothing. Conversations with her family do not count. That is not justice. You are an official that serves the community. You serve the people of Kentucky and Louisville. Breonna Taylor was one of those people, and her family are still those people. They deserve justice, and she deserves justice. And those 4 cops should be arrested, fired, and charged.
You mentioned Renee as an example, and what we're seeing is today's athlete is taking stands, they're using their activism, and they're not sticking to sports or sticking just to sports any longer. What I find interesting, though, the WNBA, they've been leading the way with this long before everything happened with George Floyd this year. I mean, you can go back the last couple of years, and they've been using their voices the last couple of years. How do we help those people who oppose this so much, that, not sticking to sports, understand that this is much bigger than just sports? This is humanity.
At the end of the day, when these athletes, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, hockey, lacrosse, volleyball, I don't care what sport is, when the Black men and women that don those uniforms take them off and get in their car and leave their practice facilities, their arenas, and try to get home, they're no different than George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, or Jacob Blake. Sandra Bland, Philando Castillo. Literally, you can list every single person that has been murdered at the hands of police. They are no different. No different at all. Natasha Cloud has, given stories of her instances with police. Bradley Beal has done the same here in DC. So has John Wall. Those are three of the biggest names in sports in Washington, D.C., which is the epicenter and the nucleus of American politics. And they have had moments where they feared for their life because they have come into contact with a police officer who does not necessarily have their safety and best interest in mind. So while people would like athletes to stick to sports, when politicians insert themselves and their politics into sports, those athletes can no longer stick to sports because it has now been implemented in their sport. When you have fans that look like you and are a representation of you and vice versa, you can't shut up and dribble. At the end of the day, the men and women of color in these leagues are still Black men and women as soon as that jersey comes off and as soon as that uniform comes off. It's no different than the coaches in the leagues. It's no different than the front office people in the leagues. Masai Ujiri, the only Black president in the NBA, in the 2019 NBA Finals, had what should have been one of the happiest moments in his professional career stripped from him at the hands of an Alameda sheriff's deputy. And it took a year for the video to come out. That means, and I understand that Masai's, lawyers released it, but that means that the Alameda Sheriff's Police Department had that video footage on police body camera for a year and still did nothing with that deputy that twice placed his hands in an aggressive manner on an NBA president who happens to be Black. That's it. We, as Black people, we don't get to change our skin. We don't get to take off a uniform of skin color at the end of the day. Officers are blue for 40 hours a week, sometimes 60 if they're doing overtime. Black men and women are Black men and women, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and 366 if it's a leap year. We don't get to take off our uniform as Black people.
As a biracial female broadcaster, what challenges have you encountered in our sports media industry as you've come up through the ranks?
Thankfully, I haven't had to experience it. And I say that with joy and hope that I don't ever have to experience it, while at the same time saying it cautiously that I am only, in my 30s and have a lifetime to go, that I still may experience it. And that's the scary part, is the fact that I've managed to go 30 years of my life with minimal interactions of racial slurs being thrown at me. And I know that I have a lifetime that I still might experience it and may have those interactions. And I am hoping that experiencing everything that we are right now and being in my 30s will allow me the mental magnitude of handling that situation, if and when it does reveal itself, to handle it correctly.
The reality in our industry is that the numbers are pretty abysmal when you look across the board of women and people of color in general being in roles, whether they're in a front-facing role like you are as a play-by-play, or whether it's behind the scenes in a prominent production position, or whether, especially in a managerial role. What can someone like myself, who is a white person, is a white female, do to not only be a better ally to you, but other other women of color and people of color in our industry to ensure that we and that you and your community gets better representation across the board in sports media?
I think, Kelly, a big portion of that is when it comes to the hiring phase of sports and sports media. And you can even look at just broadcasting, period, news, weather, whatever it may be. It comes down to the people that are in positions and have the power to hire. Make sure that, the people that you're bringing in for interviews, you're not bringing them in just for, the diversity check mark, to say that you interviewed this, that, and the third of different races and ethnicities. Make sure that the people that you're bringing in and the people you're hiring are not just qualified, but are the best person for the job. If that ends up being a white man or woman, that's fine. But making sure you're mentally having the ability to have the due diligence and do the due diligence of giving yourself the diversity of different applications and not basing an application off of a name or an address. But also, to be an ally, you have to be open and willing to listen and hear. Because you can listen, but if you don't hear what people are saying to you, then it was a waste of your time and it was a waste of that person's time. And I always say, when humans were created, we were created with 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I like to think that was because we were supposed to shut up and listen and shut up and hear what people were saying to us versus being ready to answer or being ready to talk right away. So part of allyship is understanding that your experience in life is much different than my experience in life, that you and I could walk into a restaurant or a store together and no one will question you. But people will question me. Is she supposed to be with that woman? Why is she with that woman? Is that woman in danger? Did the other girl, did she hurt her? What are they up to? Is this a planned situation? And dealing with that side of things is, I think, difficult for our white allies to understand that I can walk into a store and I might have the money to buy something, but they'll assume I don't because of the color of my skin. And, to your point of being biracial, that's the interesting thing of being a biracial or mixed race person, is the fact that genetically I know my makeup. Genetically, I know I'm, part this and part that. But my appearance on the outside, people will only see me as a Black woman. And that is how I experience life. And that is how I will experience life for the rest of my life, however long that is. But to be an ally, you have to be willing to listen, hear, but you also have to be willing to speak up and say something. And I think that's one of the biggest things, that our white allies don't realize or may not realize, that they have the ability and the power to speak up and have our backs. Because, Black men and women in the world can continue to say it on and on and on. And we can say it every single day, every single minute. And some people may listen, some people may hear. But there is privilege and power in being a white ally in today's society. And for whatever reason, people seem to listen to the white allies more than they listen to the people who are experiencing this life experience.
Following up on a bit of what we just talked about, the NBA, the G League, the WNBA, they're all largely considered the most progressive professional leagues in the world. Yet there are only 6 total play-by-play of color in pro basketball. Why does that progressiveness have yet to translate to the broadcast booth? Is it the same thing, that going back to that who we have in hiring positions?
Yeah, I think it comes down to who we have in hiring positions, but also to your earlier question of, representation matters. And unless and until, younger females, white or black, Asian, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, every female in this world, until they see themselves represented in these roles, why would they feel that they can do it as well too? And I hope my being in this position allows a younger female to, like I said, see herself in me and realize I can do that as well too. And when you look at, to your point of the NBA and the WNBA, and I apologize, I don't know the numbers exactly for the G League, but I imagine very similar to the NBA and the WNBA, you have these two leagues and these three leagues that are primarily 70% or more Black men and women. And yet, not just broadcasts, but front offices, coaching, ownerships, they don't reflect the same as the players in the league. So while, we talk about how to make the representation happen in broadcasting and in media, it also needs to happen in the other facets of the sports industry too.
What's interesting about what you just said is the whole concept of if you can see it, you can be it, and the importance of, representation matters, and for especially young women of color being able to see it. You grew up in Canada where there weren't really any female Black play-by-play broadcasters for you to look up to growing up, because you don't have the same access there to American channels. Not that there was a lot for me growing up to see a lot of Black women on TV other than Robin Roberts and Pam Oliver. Who have you turned to for mentorship in your journey along the way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, like you said, growing up in Canada, we didn't have, there's access more now to American television, but when I was growing up, there was very to little. And the women you did see, Pam Oliver, Robin Roberts, Hannah Storm, Doris Burke, not many, especially many that look like myself. So I, once I graduated college and then it got into the industry and into my journey, I utilized, this is where, social media can come in handy and is a blessing and isn't frustrating for me, is the fact that it has allowed me to connect with so many amazing Black women and men in sports. And I want to make it clear, in sports, because it's not just the media side of things. I've been able to connect with people who look like myself, both men and women, and aren't necessarily in sports media, but are in the sports industry. Photographers, team personnel, front office people. And that's where I like social media, because you can just easily find someone and try and connect with them. So while I was growing up, I didn't have many who looked like me. Now I have many who look like me, but still not many that do my role. So my mentorship group is a small but powerful and mighty group, both comprised of men and women, Black and white. And also, a big proponent for me is it's very, very healthy, and it is very impactful to also have mentors that have nothing to do with what you do for a career or a job, because they can have a different perspective than, I may have, or another person in broadcasting. So I definitely recommend and am a big proponent of people utilizing mentorship with other industries as well too.
That's really good advice. I hadn't even thought about it that way.
Yeah, like I look at things and, you may have a situation and I see it one way, you see it a similar way than I do because you understand the industry. But then I could go to, a mentor that may be a lawyer or might be a chef, and they just have a different perspective on the situation that, you know, once I talk to them and listen and hear what they have to say, I can then take that information and it gives me another arm and branch to break down the situation that I have to handle and deal with. So it's definitely important to get different perspectives. You know, when you're the boss of a company, or, you know, the CEO of a company, you don't have people that are always around you that think the same way you do. And I think, you know, when you know, it's super cliche, but it's better to be the dumbest person in a room surrounded by people who are smarter than you, because you're going to learn something. And I think mentorship is the same way. So why not utilize other people's perspective who have no clue how this industry works, because they're not biased. They see it from their own perspective.
Yeah, no doubt. Couple more questions for you, because I want to be respectful of your time. In 2018, you became the first female play-by-play in 30 years, which is mind-boggling to think 30 years. But to call an NBA preseason game when the Wizards took on the Pistons, how did that opportunity motivate you to dream even bigger?
Well, before that, it had always been a goal of mine to call NBA games. And it still is. Whether that is for a team or a national network, that goal is still a goal. I had a goal of getting to the WNBA and calling WNBA games, and I was able to achieve that, and I'm having a blast. But I still have the goal of getting to the NBA and being a voice in the NBA, and doing that game and having the ability to do that game gave me motivation to do it, but also motivation to know that I can do it. And, you know, the NBA is it's a different level, it's a different speed. It's much faster when you're there in person trying to call the game than people may think. So doing that game and being able to flow through that game gave me the motivation to know that that goal is definitely attainable, and more attainable in a timeline than I ever expected.
I was listening to an interview. This was months ago, but you did an interview with somebody, and you mentioned on it that your sort of ultimate goal, or where you want to be in 10 or 15 years, is you want Mike Breen's job as the lead voice of the NBA, which I think is awesome. I mean, I absolutely love that. And I think I saw that at some point recently, or in the last year or two, you've had a chance to meet him. So yeah. What have you picked up on just about why he is so good and in the position he's in that you can apply as you try and get to that goal?
So I did that interview, and he ended up finding out that I said that.
Really?
Which is kind of funny and a little bit crazy to think that, you know, someone either told him or he found out, you know, happenstance. However, he found out. At the end of the day, he found out, which is kind of awesome. And, you know, fast forward to, which is crazy to think about, our final game right before, you know, the NBA shut everything down, we actually played the Knicks, and he wasn't on a national broadcast, so he was doing that game as the Knicks broadcast, because, you know, he's one of the few that have a really great setup with their career that they still get to call for a team, but also do national games. And one of the Wizards PR people, Darren Jenkins, actually gave me the heads up that day that he would be doing the game. And I was like, okay, if it works out, like, I want to meet him, because that's who I grew up, you know, national broadcast. That's who I grew up hearing. I grew up hearing Mike Breen, and got to meet him before the game. And he actually mentioned it to me, which was mind blowing that months later he remembered. And the crazy thing is the fact that, you know, when you go to meet someone who, you admire and you idolize and you want to do the job they do, you never know how they're going to be in person. You never expect them to know who you are, and whatnot. And the crazy thing about it is when he was walking over towards me with Darren was about to introduce him, and he actually said, "Megan McPeak, it's great to meet you." He knew who I was before the introduction could even happen, which is so insanely awesome to me, even now thinking about it. And we probably talked for, it felt like, 5-10 minutes, which on a game day prior to the game is a lot of time, as you know. So it was pretty awesome. And he joked about it and wished me luck in my career, and said anything he can do to help, let him know, reach out to him and that type of thing. But the fun part about the conversation was the fact he said, first thing he said after saying my name was, "Now I hear you want to take my job." And it made me laugh, because it's just like, it's crazy to think that a man in his position, or anyone in his position with his legacy and tenure in the NBA, even remembered my name, even remembered the story and the situation in the interview, to then talk to me about it. And I laughed and I said, yeah, that would be, my ideal move. It would be to be your successor. Excuse me. And he's got the big Mike Breen smile on his face, and he laughs and said, "I love that idea. I love your, I love your mindset. Just give me a few more years. Let me do this in a few more years, and then I'll retire and you can take over." And like, I was just blown away at the fact he said that. But yeah, it's crazy to think that, I can shoot him an email if I have any questions. Even, same with Doris Burke. If I have a question, I can get in contact with her and ask, or, get some advice, that, college version of myself only dreamed of. And now it's kind of happening, and it's reality for me. So that's been kind of crazy. But yeah, the fact he joked about that and wasn't offended by it, and, took it tongue in cheek, and, had a conversation with me about it and supported me in wanting to do that was amazing.
Because you talked earlier about really staying in the present and being in the present when you're calling games, but just even the fact that you're living out, like you're meeting these people that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you never probably would imagine you'd have the chance to meet her, but you're getting on their level. Yeah,
it's crazy. And in no way am I saying I'm on Mike Breen's level. I'm not yet. But yeah, it's crazy, because I look at my first year in college in the radio program, and, talking to my classmates and my professors about wanting to be the Canadian Doris Burke. Seems like so long. I mean, it was long ago, knowing when I graduated, but it seems like a whole lifetime ago that I look back and I'm like, wow, like, you wanted to become the Canadian Doris Burke, and you're doing everything in your power to still do that, but you've forgot. Like, I've forgotten that I wanted to do that, in the sense of that's no longer my goal. My goal shifted to just be one of the best and most respected broadcasters in the NBA, WNBA, and G League. And I hope that I hope one day, when I do make the NBA and am in the NBA, that's the way I'm viewed as. To my earlier point of not being viewed as a female play-by-play broadcaster, but the way that coaches and players respect Doris, I hope to have that level of respect from them. The way they respect Becky Hammon, Carol Lawson as coaches, I aspire to have that level of respect from the NBA coaches and players as well too.
One of the other areas I get asked a lot about by younger broadcasters is having or getting an agent. Your agent is Debbie Spander, who's kind of one of the titans in the industry. How did you know you were ready to sign with an agent?
I knew the only way and the best way for myself. And that's key, is my experience and your experience are different. My experience and, another male or female broadcaster's experience is different. So for me, knowing I wanted to get to the US and work in the US, to try and take advantage of every opportunity that could come my way, I knew I needed someone who had connections in the US and in the industry. And, I took a few months to find someone and do some searching and reach out to people and have conversations. And looking back, it's crazy to think she was actually the only agent that reached back out. I had reached out to 5 or 6, and she was the only one who responded. So the fact that, living back in Canada at a time when I was relatively unknown, at least in the US, I kind of had a little bit of a following in Canada. When there's only one NBA team, the fans know who you are. When there's only one G League team, the fans know who you are. So, looking back on that and her taking a chance on someone who was unknown to the industry, said a lot about her. And it made, her being the only one made the decision easy. But at the same time, it felt like the right decision at the time. It felt like the right move for me at the time. And after that, I believe that was, it was 2 years, and then now 2 years in the US. So I've been working with her for 4 years now.
That's great. Meghan, is there anything that we haven't chatted about or anything I haven't asked that you think is important to know?
I want to say, Kelly, that you covered everything pretty well. The biggest thing I wanted to make sure was that we had, the conversation about what's happening right now in the country and around the world, and just making sure, that people are listening and hearing other people. And, while you asked about being an ally, at the same time, as Black men and women, we also have to be willing to listen and hear people. Because how can we expect others to do the same if we're not willing to do that as well too? So I appreciate you for wanting to speak with me and wanting to have this conversation, and to take a note from Emmanuel Acho, an uncomfortable conversation. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you for wanting to have it. So thank you.
Of course. We connected a couple of years ago. It was, at least back in 2018 over Twitter initially. And so you've been on my radar for a while, and I've been following the arc of your career, and it's so exciting to see just, the opportunities you're getting, and all the good things you are doing. And I, like I mentioned earlier in this interview, I love the way that you're so active with your voice. Keep doing all these things, and I look forward to continue to get to know you better, and hopefully one of these days be able to meet in person. Let's let this pandemic hopefully end sooner than later.
Yes. Wear a mask, people. Wear a mask.
Exactly. Yeah. You would like to be able to go see your family in Canada sooner than later.
That would be ideal. I'd also like to see fans in arenas soon. So wear a mask.
Totally.